Spiritual abuse is a deeply destructive form of manipulation that occurs in religious or spiritual settings, where those in positions of authority exploit their power to control and harm others. These abusers, whether religious leaders, mentors, or even family members, use their spiritual standing as a cloak to impose their will, leaving victims feeling powerless and spiritually lost. The damage runs deep, affecting not just the emotional and psychological well-being of the victim, but their very relationship with the Bible. At the heart of spiritual abuse lie three key elements: the misuse of spiritual authority, the harm inflicted on the victim, and the self-serving benefits sought by the abuser. Here, the abuser exercises control under the pretense of divine guidance or spiritual insight. The victim who seeks genuine spiritual support or empowerment instead finds themselves diminished and weakened, often feeling abandoned by the very faith they sought to nurture. Meanwhile, the abuser enjoys the loyalty, obedience, and often heightened status that comes from their exploitation of the victim's trust and vulnerability. The factors that define spiritual abuse are also critical in understanding its impact: power, psychological harm, and spiritual harm. The abuse begins with an exploitation of spiritual power, where the abuser claims to have authority, using this to manipulate and control. This leads to deep psychological trauma as the victim starts to question their self-worth and sanity. Spiritual harm follows closely, as the victim's personal connection to their faith is disrupted, leaving them spiritually adrift, grappling with doubts, fears, and feelings of betrayal. Spiritual abuse often takes three forms. Spiritual neglect often occurs when leaders or caregivers fail to provide support during critical moments, leaving individuals feeling abandoned during their times of greatest need. Spiritual manipulation is a more covert form, where the abuser distorts the victim's reality and spiritual autonomy. Finally, spiritual violence is the most overt of all, where the abuser exerts full control over the victim's daily life and spiritual growth. The harm caused by spiritual abuse manifests in various ways, often weaving together emotional, psychological, and spiritual damage. One of the most significant impacts is the loss of personal freedom. Victims experience a kind of spiritual bondage, where their authority is stripped away and they are left feeling trapped within the abuser's control. In addition, spiritual abuse distorts the victim's image of God. The abuser's actions twist the victim's understanding of a right devotional character, leading them to associate God with fear, control, and oppression rather than with understanding and liberation. Another devastating consequence is the disruption of the victim's ability to make sense of their experiences. Spiritual abuse distorts reality, causing victims to doubt their judgment and sense of self. The abuser's manipulation leaves them feeling confused and disoriented, often unable to trust their own instincts or beliefs. Finally, the emotional toll of spiritual abuse often leads to depression and a deep sense of despair. The weight of the abuse, combined with the betrayal of their spiritual trust, leaves victims emotionally exhausted and disconnected from both themselves and their devotional character. The effects of spiritual abuse ripple far beyond the individual, often perpetuating a cycle of harm within spiritual communities. Those who have suffered may, consciously or unconsciously, adopt the behaviors they endured, further embedding these toxic patterns within their communities. As a result, the damage of spiritual abuse is not only personal, but generational, affecting future relationships and spiritual journeys. Healing from spiritual abuse requires a process of reclaiming personal freedom and spiritual autonomy. Victims must come to understand that the confusion, shame, and loss they have experienced are not personal failures, but the result of profound manipulation. By recognizing the abuse for what it is, one can begin to rebuild a sense of self, restore connection to the Bible, and find a path toward devotional healing and liberation. Through this journey, one can reclaim understanding on one's own terms, free from the control and distortion of spiritual abusers. What is spiritual abuse? There are three elements of spiritual abuse that lead into three factors of spiritual abuse, that then lead into three forms of spiritual abuse, that then lead into 5 categories of harm upon the individuals that are or that have been suffering spiritual abuse. Now, this is relevant because our devotional journey takes us to wherever it takes us, and we pick up whatever we pick up, and we do not know sometimes where the underlying intention for what we are picking up spiritually, philosophically, theologically, where it comes from. And we have no idea where the relation concerning our experiences in the past, how that relates to us in our endeavor in the present. And most often than not, spiritual abuse is a factor for where our, not devotional conscience, but where the conscience of our human being ends up in its spirituality. So we want to look at what spiritual abuse is, and we want to be able to harmonize this with counsel from the scriptures, which we are going to do. So what is spiritual abuse? Spiritual abuse is the mistreatment of a person who is in need of help, support, or greater spiritual empowerment, with the result of weakening, undermining, or decreasing that person's spiritual empowerment. One who defines, this is Oakley and Kinmond, spiritual abuse as spiritual abuse being coercion and control of one individual by another in a spiritual context. The target experiences spiritual abuse as a deeply emotional, personal attack. This abuse may include manipulation and exploitation, enforced accountability, censorship of decision-making, requirements for secrecy and silence, pressure to conform, misuse of scripture or the pulpit to control behavior, requirement of obedience to the abuser, the suggestion that the abuser has a quote-unquote divine position isolated from others, especially those external to the abusive context. Now, what does all of this look like? To the book of Ezekiel 34, 2 through 4. Ezekiel 34, 2 through 4, thus saith the Lord God unto the shepherds, woe be to the shepherds of Israel that do feed themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flocks? You eat the fat, you clothe you with the wool, you kill them that are fed, but you feed not the flock. The deceased, the diseased have you not strengthened, neither have you healed that which was sick, neither have you bound up that which was broken, neither have you brought again that which was driven away, neither have you sought that which was lost, but with force and cruelty have you ruled them. Now, who is this to? In verse 2, we learn the shepherds. Shepherds, the priests, the ministers, the priesthood, the organized ministry. Everything here is what spiritual abuse looks like. It looks like the religious leadership or religious leaders violating the conscience by what is either spoken or handwritten. To the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah 23, 25 to 27. I have heard what the prophet said that prophesy lies in my name, saying, I have dreamed, I have dreamed. How long shall this be in the heart of the prophets that prophesy lies? Yea, they are prophets of the deceit of their own heart, which think to cause my people to forget my name by their dreams, which they tell every man to his neighbor, as their fathers have forgotten my name. For Baal, spiritual abuse looks like the priesthood, the priest, the minister wearing their congregation or wearing their followers as badges. Wearing the congregation, wearing their followers as badges. And again, what may this look like? Galatians 6, 13, for neither they themselves who are circumcised keep the law, but desire to have you circumcised that they may glory in your flesh. All of this is coming from the priesthood. All of this is coming from the priesthood, elevating one particular group within the congregation, yet destroying another. Going to the book of Ezekiel 13, 20-22, wherefore thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against your pillows, wherewith you hunt the souls to make them fly. I will tear them from your arms, and will let the souls go, even the souls that you hunt, to make them fly. Your kerchiefs also will I tear, and deliver my people out of your hand, and they shall be no more in your hand to be hunted, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Because with lies you have made the heart of the righteous sad, whom I have not made sad, and strengthened the hands of the wicked, that he should not return from his wicked way, by promising him life. This is the structure of how spiritual abuse works. Spiritual abuse in preference to a particular audience in the congregation. Spiritual abuse concerning the conscience of the ones for whom that abuse is for. Spiritual abuse, and the Bible is highlighting priesthood specifically because these are the ultimate agents for spiritual abuse to the Bible's conscience. And let's not just hold this to priesthoods. These are the seminary trained. These are the rabbinical school trained. These are the masters of divinity, the Bible PhD experts. These are everything that you would want to hold to that. The Bible's standard. It is against that. It is against them. And it holds them as being in account for spiritual abuse. That's what it looks like from everything that we are reading here as the Bible shows us. But what about those elements that lead in to the discourse of what that spiritual abuse magnifies? Concerning those three elements leading into spiritual abuse, since the pioneering work on spiritual abuse was published in 1991, many different definitions have emerged. Samuel Fernandez has analyzed 16 studies on spiritual abuse since 1991. He has discerned three obvious elements of spiritual abuse: the misuse of spiritual power, the harm caused to the victims, and the benefits sought by the accusers. One more time, those three elements: spiritual power, the misuse of it, the harm caused to the victims, and the benefits sought by the abusers. What do these elements look like? Starting from the ground up, the benefits, what do those benefits by the abusers, aside from possessing people as badges, what benefits are to be gained? 2 Timothy 3, 5-7. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts, ever learning, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. The profit that is to be gained is a profit whereby the abuser, as the Bible is here framing this, the priest, the minister in the Bible's context. And it doesn't have to be in person as this individual here is at a pulpit, right? This has to do with what is handwritten and what is passed down. Dogma that comes out of the mouths of our friends and family, of our mothers, brothers, sisters, cousins, and so on. It all stems back from the pen of a priest. So it doesn't have to be the actual person. Bible is also concerned with the pen, as we saw in those verses previous. Those are the pillows. Remember those pillows that Ezekiel talked about? The pillows that keep the arms comfortable, to keep the individual safe and comfortable as they're sitting and listening, which tend to make you feel comfortable enough to go to sleep. The benefit to be gained is just that. You sleeping, and them taking advantage of you while sleeping. Again, this is not literal sleep. This is the slumber of the devotional intellect. This is the slumber of the higher faculties. Being in that slumber, being in that state, one is able to be taken advantage of. And in a state where you are ever learning, just like the one that is taking advantage of you, and never able to come into the truth, or the fact, or the reality, or the distinction, or the philosophy, or the understanding or the wisdom that is at the core of the scriptures. Forever quote unquote learning, forever quote unquote making sense, and yet never able to. That way you can keep coming back. That's the benefit, or that's a benefit. Now, still working from the ground up, what is the harm that is potentially caused to the individual? Still working from the ground up, seeing the benefit. Now, what is the harm that is caused? Proverbs 1:11-16. If they say, come with us, let us lay wait for blood. Let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up, alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. Verse 3 is that harm. 13 is that harm where it says we shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. The precious substance and spoil, that is what is the main attraction. That is what is the main attraction. The spilling of that innocent blood through misuse of spiritual power. But what does that look like? Ezekiel 22:6-9. Behold, the princes of Israel, every one were in thee to their power to shed blood. In thee have they set light by father and mother. In the midst of thee have they dealt by oppression with the stranger. In thee have they vexed the fatherless and the widow. Thou hast despised mine holy things and hast profaned my Sabbaths. In thee are men that carry tales to shed blood, and in thee they eat upon the mountains. In the midst of thee they commit lewdness. Now, we have to be able to understand. No one has to tell anyone not to murder. That's either a breach of conscience or a stay of conscience. The shedding of blood in Bible terms, the murder in the Bible's language, it is a murder that occurs through tales, through the pen of priest, through the pen of minister. The shedding of blood is not the literal shedding of blood, because blood is not literal blood to the Bible's mind. Blood is the source of life, we learn in the book of Leviticus. Life in and of itself is a concept of its own that has everything to do with how we maintain and regulate the contents of our devotional conversation. It is the intention, when under spiritual abuse, that your blood, that your life is shed. And it isn't shed literally, it's shed through tales. Shed through tales. Philosophical, theological, mythological, ritual, however you want to think about that, through tales. Turning to the book of Ezekiel 22:26-27. Her priests have violated my law, have profaned my holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and profane. Neither have they showed difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned among them. Her princes in the midst thereof are like ravening wolves, wolves ravening the prey, to shed blood and to destroy souls, to get honest gain. Question: do souls have blood? Whatever we want to believe about a soul, does it have blood? The answer is no. The soul in question, the blood in question, not literal, but has everything to do with the state of the devotional conversation's thoughts, feelings, actions, and behavior, the state of the conversation's character, the state of the conversation's being. These three elements that lead in, as we will see next, into the three factors of spiritual abuse, they work against the individual. They profit the one that is giving the abuse, but to the one that is suffering, we may not be able to process what we're going through. We may not be able to understand. The Bible keeps everything in a figurative language, and it's hidden in a sense through sort of a philosophical illustration. But when you break down the philosophical illustration, you can clearly understand that the Bible is pointing to a very treacherous act by institutionalized or organized religion and religious theory, and especially their leaders and leadership that is attached to them. To the Bible's mind, these are the perpetrators of spiritual abuse, and to the Bible's mind, we ought to know that.
Ever wonder if your faith truly reflects your experience? Discover the essence of a living and breathing faith in A Faith That Works. A Faith That Works challenges you to not just believe, but to act on your beliefs in a positive way. Cooperate with the Bible to cultivate a faith that doesn't just speak, but also acts. Give your faith the chance to shine. Your journey is unique. A Faith That Works encourages personal reflection to find your devotional essence. Deepen your connection with the Bible. Let its devotional character shine through your actions. Experience the transformative power of a book challenging you to examine your faith. Let it change you. Let it guide you. Embark on a journey to explore the depths of your beliefs. Let A Faith That Works be your compass.
Seeing how those elements work with and for spiritual abuse, what do the three factors that they lead into look like? What are those three factors? Although differences are highlighted in how spiritual abuse and trauma are conceptualized and defined, consistency is found with regard to three main factors: abuse of power, psychological harm, and spiritual harm. In this context, spiritual abuse and trauma have been defined as abuse of power in a religious or spiritual context, resulting in psychological and spiritual harm. Now, hearing about these three factors, my mind goes to the scene of Paul and James in the book of Acts. The labor that Paul decided to put himself through. The labor he decided to put himself through, knowing that he believed and taught something contrary. Now, I'm going to summarize what that scene is, and then after that, I'm going to summarize the points of psychological trauma that Paul experienced that lead in and show and manifest or demonstrate spiritual abuse working and at hand. Paul's decision to participate in the Jewish rite, despite his reservations, is a significant event in his ministry. This occurred when he visited Jerusalem and was advised by James and the elders to join in a purification ritual to show that he still respected Jewish customs. Paul's compulsion to demonstrate that his theological stance was aligned with James and the Jerusalem church stemmed from a desire to maintain unity and avoid conflict within the early Christian community. He wanted to prove that he was not teaching Jews to abandon the law of Moses, which was a contentious issue at the time. However, this decision went against Paul's own philosophical convictions about freedom from the law of Moses and from the concept of the law of Moses that he preached to Gentiles. His participation in the rite led to a misunderstanding among some Jews who accused him of bringing Gentiles into the temple and defiling it. This accusation caused a riot, and Paul was seized and ultimately arrested by Roman soldiers. Now, where is the psychological trauma in this? 1. Betrayal and misunderstanding. Paul was misunderstood and falsely accused by his own people, which could have led to feelings of betrayal and isolation. Being seized and nearly killed by a mob would have been a deeply traumatic experience. So I'm looking at this from the perspective of psychology here, the psychology of the trauma that Paul would have suffered, which in a fixed lens, as we're looking, is the type of spiritual or philosophical abuse in the moment that he suffered. Now, concerning his imprisonment, the sudden shift from being a free man to being bound in chains and imprisoned would have been a significant psychological shock. The uncertainty of his fate and the harsh conditions of Roman imprisonment that could have caused immense stress and anxiety upon him. Now, this bleeds into his conflict of identity. Paul was a Jew who had embraced Christianity and was preaching to Gentiles. The conflict between his Jewish heritage and his mission to the Gentiles, it might have caused internal turmoil, especially when his actions may have been misrepresented and misinterpreted. Keeping everything here in this very simple. I'm not going in depth with this philosophically or theologically. Again, this is strictly psychologically. Where's the spiritual harm in this? In his crisis of conscience. Participating in the Jewish rite against his own theological convictions might have led to a crisis of conscience. Paul believed in liberty from the religious law through his Christ, and going against this belief could have caused spiritual distress, which then bleeds into him questioning the plan of his God. Facing such severe consequences for trying to maintain unity within the church might have led Paul to question his God's plan for him. He might have struggled with understanding why his efforts to do the right thing resulted in such suffering, which then bleed into a sense of failure. Paul's arrest and the subsequent events might have made him feel like he had failed in his mission. The inability to continue his work freely and the potential harm to his reputation could have been spiritually disheartening to him. Of course, we know how the narrative goes. He is reassured of his mission, yet that sense of failure is there shown in the narrative as it is fixed. I'm pointing this out, this season in the life of the character Paul from the book of Acts, to show how important it is for spiritual convictions to be maintained, and how when those spiritual convictions, when those philosophical convictions, when those theological convictions are repressed due to our environment or due to our perceived environment, the repression of such can cause a lot of trauma and a lot of harm, can cause a lot of trouble to the experience that we're supposed to be having, and then it can cause us to go into a figurative prison. As the character Paul here was sent into prison, we, not literal we, our devotional conversation, can and will find itself in prison. Once in prison, once locked up, once confined, if not being as nourished as this character Paul was when he was imprisoned, well then we, by the human impulsive religious experience that we naturally are having, we are going to interpret that in a naturally impulsive human experience way. That's going to cause the devotional conversation's character that is imprisoned to shrivel up, and it's going to magnify the conscience of the human impulsive experience, the character of such. That's going to lead to many, many conflicts. How we handle that, we may take on other denominated terms and other religious denominations, religious, spiritual, secular, religious in nature. And the trauma, psychological, builds up from there. And then we go into different routes and into different coping mechanisms and using different isms or ianities or whatever we want to use to cope with the pain suffered from our experience without actually letting it manifest into what it actually is, internally expressing it, and then thinking on it rationally and figuring it out practically. That causes a lot of damage. To who we are as human or personal beings and as devotional creatures or as devotional beings. That causes much, as we're seeing, could have been the case for the individual Paul, looking at it from a mental side. Everything that this individual went through, we can and will go through also, if we are not careful to allow our devotional conversation the room that it needs to intellectually grow into the character that it is supposed to be, without allowing another opinion, another person, another thought, another experience, another ritual, another institution, whatever, without allowing that to get into the way of the growth and the development that it needs, without having to prove worthiness of a belief or even of a disbelief, but allowing what should be captured to be captured naturally through the experience. Should we traverse the landscape of the Bible's mind, beginning with the Bible's words, we will find that there is no positive thing said within it about the institutionalized priest-minister, about the accredited pastor, minister, priest. There's nothing positive in the Bible about them. There's nothing positive in the Bible about them because to the Bible's mind, it understands the individual devotional conversation is supposed to develop with it personally. There's a different framework within the religious world. Bible's framework and the Bible's narrative is one where the devotional conversation is coming into its own, after which affecting the world, the religious world from which it was conceived. Now the norm is that the devotional conversation is not conceived, as we've seen through the illustrations there. how conversations are handled. The norm is to have the devotional conversation within the womb of the denomination perpetually. One is never to be born when they are in their devotional conversation. And then whether one remains within that womb or whether one is claiming to now be irreligious or whatever religion is picked up, no matter what you're calling yourself, no matter what you think you are yet in that womb and you are not passed out of it to grow into an adult or to grow into maturity. The devotional conversation, and it is set up according to the standards and the dictates of the religious world, that the devotional conversation and its conscience, thoughts, feelings, actions, behavior, or character remains within the womb of its upbringing. So as we're feeling frustrated with whatever we're feeling frustrated with, as we're going through what we're going through, as we're seeing that some things may not make any sense here or any sense there, or weighed together, they make altogether no sense, it is because we are looking at everything and things through the lens of the womb that we have yet not passed out of. We have not yet passed out of that womb due to us suffering unconsciously, we may not know, spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse that has 3 elements, and spiritual abuse that has 3 factors, and spiritual abuse that has 3 forms. Now, what do those 3 forms of spiritual abuse look like? Doris Wagner speaks of 3 forms of spiritual abuse. Spiritual neglect takes place in various ecclesial communions and religious communities, or in families by parents who fail to give their subordinates the necessary and obligatory support in times of distress or need, or in times of growth. Spiritual manipulation is a subtle and covert way of acting when a responsible person decides a subordinate, deceives a subordinate, and gives him or her false information about his or her behavior. Being deprived of personal freedom, of which he or she is not even aware, he or she loses touch with himself or herself and becomes completely controllable. He or she sees himself or herself as the world and the world's. He or she sees himself or herself and the world through the eyes of the manipulator. Spiritual violence is the total control of the subordinate by the superordinate. He or she must always follow his or her instructions, accept the ideals presented, and strictly limit contact with others. His or her daily life and activities are completely under his or her control. Now, those are the 3 forms of spiritual abuse. And just to summarize what those 3 forms are, they are A, spiritual neglect, failing to provide necessary support during times of distress or growth. B, spiritual manipulation, deceiving a subordinate to control their perception and freedom. C, spiritual violence, exercising total control over a subordinate's life and limiting their contact with others. Now, these 3 forms of spiritual abuse, they lead into 5 categories of harm. The harm caused to people by spiritual abuse is, on the one hand, similar to that caused by other types of abuse, but on the other hand, because it is done in the context of religion or spirituality, it affects them on their religious or spiritual level. It can be classified into 5 categories: loss of freedom, a true state of bondage; distortion of the image of God, undermining the process of making sense, disabling of trust in others and in oneself, and the emergence of depression. Some authors who have analyzed the testimonies of spiritual abuse persons believe that the depth and breadth of the damage inflicted reveals precisely the loss of one's own identity, dignity, spiritual autonomy, and the capacity to love and respect oneself and others, and to be open to trusting the other and oneself. The dynamics of spiritual abuse, which are similar to those of sexual abuse. Now get that. That's what studies show. The dynamics of spiritual abuse are similar to those of sexual abuse. They often result in the victim becoming a perpetrator later on, as they unconsciously adopt the behavioral models of the perpetrator and, in a leadership role, repeat what they themselves have experienced. Now, those are the 5 categories of spiritual harm. Just to sum that up: 1, loss of freedom. Victims experience a true state of bondage. 2, distortion of the image of God. Their perception of God is negatively altered. 3, undermining the process of making sense. It disrupts their ability to make sense of their experiences. 5, disabling trust. It erodes trust in others and in oneself. 5, emergence of depression, victims often develop depression as a result. If our experience has taken us looking back at those 5 categories of harm, if our experience has taken us to feel, if our devotional or religious experience has taken us to feel loss of freedom, a distortion of the image of God, an undermining process of making sense of that loss and of that image, has led us to disable trust and has allowed us to form some sort of feeling of a depression of which will find expression either outside of religion or yet within it somehow and in some way, we are victims of spiritual abuse. We cannot understand much within the religious world because it's not permitted. We will never be able to understand much within the religious world because the religious world really doesn't even understand the philosophy that is within it. When we begin to desire to make steps to progress, those steps will begin to change, mix and mash according to the standards and the dictates that are within the religious world. We will not be able to get to where we want to get. We will see a cyclical event taking place to where there is a circle of misunderstanding which will cause confusion. This will lead to a sense or a sort of trauma, which will eventually lead to us picking up either a coping mechanism that will lead us into a branch of spirituality or whatever that is, or will lead us into a branch of a religion or a secular spirituality, whatever that is. Either way, we have to understand that we have been suffering 3 elements of spiritual abuse, 3 factors of spiritual abuse, and the 3 forms of those factors of spiritual abuse that have been magnified by 5 categories of harm suffered by our devotional conversation.
Let the Bible be your sanctuary of peace, reflection, and wisdom. Let each verse light your path, like a lantern guiding travelers through night's darkest hours. Embrace words of wisdom as leaves to a tree, each one vital for your growth and nourishment. In moments of uncertainty, let its counsel be the anchor, steadying your ship amidst life's stormy seas. Seek counsel not just in joy, but in trials, for in its guidance you'll find a friend. Let every parable, every psalm, resonate within you, creating a heart and soul that is newly attuned to think and feel. Thus, journey with the Bible as your guide and counselor, and let its wisdom light your path to an enduring peace.
So what are we supposed to do? What can we do? You know, we've suffered damage that we are not aware of, and yet we are in our lives experiencing some sort of psychological harm that we can't put our finger on. It's leading us into a direction of thought that we in reality would not want to have or do not want to have and really don't need everything else that we have going on within us. What do we do from here? Do we internalize it? And if we do, how do we process what we are internalizing? Where's that going to take us? Where are we going to let it take us? What are we going to do? Well, we can do a number of things that tend to masking the delusion that we have to gain or regain control of the experience, to claim an identity. Or we can, go the opposite direction and dismount from that and do something very, very contrary to where our minds originally were primarily. Or we can look at Psalm 51. Psalm 51, 5 and 6, Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part thou shalt make me to know wisdom. We are supposed to know, second of all, I'm starting with the second, which is verse 6, we are supposed to know that above everything else, what is within us is supposed to hold intellect, personal wisdom. And then first of all, we are supposed to know that we have to acknowledge that our mother has conceived us in error. Now, this is not literal mother. This is not a literal womb. Ezekiel 23, 2 through 4. Son of man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother. They committed whoredoms in Egypt. They committed whoredoms in their youth. There were their breasts pressed, and there they bruised the teats of their virginity. And the names of them were Aholah the elder and Aholibah her sister. And they were mine, and they bare sons and daughters. Thus were their names. Samaria is Aholah, and Jerusalem is Aholibah. This is not literal, clearly. This mother is not literal. These daughters are not literal. These daughters are religious institutions. This mother is a religious institution. One's mother is one's primary devotional or religious institution. That's who our not personal, our body of devotion, that's where the mother of our body of devotion is the primary religious institution for which that quote-unquote faith is conceived. And it is and always will be conceived in sin. That saying is a trip, and that's another part of spiritual abuse, where you have secular religion and secular irreligion arguing about the fact that the natural human frame is sin. To the Bible's mind, that's not how that works. The Bible's mind does not look primarily at the natural human frame. The frame that the Bible is mostly concerned with is the frame of the devotional conversation. It is conceived in sin, not you. You're another problem. You're another thing. Something completely separate from what the initial context of what the Bible is getting at, is talking about. The body of every single devotional conversation that will be on earth will be conceived in religious error, is what that means. In religious error. Isaiah 59. Isaiah 59, 11 and 12. What is this error? What is this sin? We roar all like bears and mourn sore like doves. We look for judgment, but there is none, for salvation, but it is far from us. For our transgressions are multiplied before thee, and our sins testify against us. For our transgressions are with us, and as for our iniquities, we know them. In transgressing and lying against the Lord, and departing away from our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart, words of falsehood. Sin is very specific. Quote unquote, sin is very specific, and it is associated with a specific class. Sin is associated with a specific class. The priesthood. What is sin in context? Lying against the deity's character, lying against their deity's character. This is the priesthood, lying against the character of the living God, causing a departing from the character of the living God, giving voice to oppression and revolt as from the living God, conceiving and uttering false words from the heart. And highlighted Isaiah 29:13, their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Only priests, only priesthood, only pastors, only ministers, only the accredited have this power to do so in the religious institution. The sinner, to the Bible's mind, in right context, is priest, pastor, minister, priesthood, and everything that is within it, everything that comes from up out of it, everything that is attributed from it and into it and coming up from out of it. That's what sin is. That's who the sinner is to the Bible. We have to be able to isolate from what we opine to be negative and from what the Bible is allowing its character to show as deviant, which is why Psalm 51 is important. Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, which bleeds into Romans 12, verse 2, and be not conformed to this world. This is the religious world. This isn't the literal, secular, natural, biological, ecological world. This is the religious world, because that's the lens that the Bible operates in. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And in this verse, in these two verses, Psalm 51:10, and then Romans 12:2, We've got the formula for how to defeat the abuse, the religious, the spiritual, the philosophical, the theological abuse that we have been and are currently suffering. This is the formula. The formula: be renewed in your mind. And now you're going to have to switch it, because being conceived within the religious world likes to magnify the human mind and to confuse a philosophical experience with simply human impulse. Belief through human stimulus is what the religion and the spiritual irreligion of the religious world and the secular world is. As we allow ourselves to pass out of the womb that we're supposed to for proper growth and development of our devotional conversation, we're supposed to understand the responsibility and the accountability that we have to our devotional conversation to renew its intellect, refresh its intellect, regenerate its intellect, resurrect its intellect. Going to be frustration. There's going to be, however, feelings are going to be there. Due time, patience, and temperance to get past all of that and yet remain grounded in the fact that what is within still has to grow. The deconstructing is simply just a signed case, a signed or unassigned case for purposeful growth. Not worrying about where we came from, what we came from, who we came from, where. It's growth individual, because Bible's philosophical context is growth individual quite naturally within it. When we can take that into consideration, we can look the abuse that we are and have been suffering in the face, and then we can respond back to it intelligently and in time, benevolently, because that's actually how it's supposed to be responded to. This isn't a negative experience. It only feels negative because we're going through what we're going through, or have been going through what we have been going through. This isn't a negative experience. This is actually the greatest gift and miracle that one can receive, which is an awakening to the devotional conscience and to the devotional conversation's character from the concept and from the womb that the religious world is. So while suffering the spiritual, philosophical, theological, mythological abuse that we have been, the time to grow up means the time to grow up. And for our devotional conversation to move on to a living experience that benefits not just us internally or personally, but eventually those that are around and outside of us.